Have you ever felt that your story was too small or insignificant? That there are no dark tales of battles fought, quests taken, addictions overcome? That your life is a simple tale that doesn't offer much on the stage of life? You live a quiet existence with nothing truly special about who you are or what you've done. As you reflect on your life, there's no powerful story of danger and intrigue worth sharing with others. I remember sitting in a coffee house with a former student named Zach. Zach was raised in a Christian home with godly parents who taught him well. He and his siblings were good people on the straight and narrow, kind, talented, and respectful. There were no skeletons in his closet, no mysterious backstories of pain and regret. I'm sure you know the type. Maybe you are that type. As we sat there talking, he told me how he felt God was calling him into ministry, but he wondered what he had to offer. We had been to enough conferences and camps to hear stories of how God had rescued others from sex and drugs and rock and roll. So how could Zach compete with that? How could God use this young man who's never experienced the depths of depravity or discovered a personal tale of redemption and salvation? As I sat with Zach, I explained that not everybody has a tragic story. In fact, most of us live quiet, humble lives. But that doesn't mean that our story is any less value to the world than others. That each of us has a tale to tell. Sure, your story might not relate to some people, but there are many who have a life like yours who need to hear that God loves them and that God can use them too. Each of us has a story with a past, a present, and a future. A story that might not seem powerful at the time, but a life worth living and a story worth sharing. Or maybe you feel like the hobbits, Samwise and Frodo, who somehow got caught up in a story that was too big for them. Sam would have been content to stay home in the Shire, dreaming of the day when he would have the courage to ask out Rosie Cotton. But somehow he and his friends have found themselves in a story that just feels overwhelming. They are on a quest to do what is right in the midst of evil and destruction. They're stuck in the middle of a tale filled with sorrow and tears and pain and loss. And as they inch their way along the journey, they're left to wonder if they will ever find a happy ending, if there's any purpose in their painful story. John Eldridge, in his book Epic, writes that life is a story. Each day has a beginning and an end. There are all sorts of characters, all sorts of settings. A year goes by like a chapter of a novel. Sometimes it seems like a tragedy, sometimes like a comedy, but whatever happens, it's a story through and through. And your life is a story. Each of us has a story. Unfortunately, many of us don't see the value in our own story. We don't see how the chapters of our lives bring meaning and purpose into our world. Like Zach, we think that our story is insignificant, that God can only use people who barely escape the clutches of sin and regret. Or like Samwise, we think that we're just supporting characters in someone else's story, that our role is to help someone else live out the story that God has for them. Or maybe you feel like our psalmist in Psalm 126. For so long, we have been sowing tears of sorrow. As you look back at the story of your life, you wonder why. Why did you have to go through such difficult experiences? Why aren't you exempt from trials and tribulations that others seem to be? Why is there so much pain and sadness in your life? When will God bring relief? You want to cry out to God, restore our fortunes, Lord, but you feel bankrupt by life. If life is a story, it's a rotten story at best. Or as Lady Macbeth would say, it is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. Of course, we all want to live epic lives, We want to be in one of those sprawling adventures of good versus evil. We long to be a part of a story that moves people, or as Eldridge says, story is the language of the heart. Stories nourish us. They provide a kind of food the soul craves. Stories shed light on our lives. They give us our best answers to all of life's big questions, and to most of the small ones as well. How we long to be a part of some of these types of stories, to be the central character in a heroic tale that people sing songs about. That one day they will tell their children, here is the story of Judy the empowered, Michael the steadfast, Deborah the bold, Jane the determined. Listen to the songs of Sue the compassionate, Louise the faithful, Joel the passionate, Neil the daring. Today we find ourselves singing Psalm 126, a song of witness, a song that tells the story, a song that tells our story, and a song that proclaims God's story to the nations. It's a story that offers witness of the highs and lows of life and leads others to proclaim the Lord has done great things for them. As we sing this psalm, we recognize that God has given each of us a story with a past, a present, and a future. It's a story with a rising and falling action. It's a story of brokenness and restoration, with tears of sorrow and shouts of joy. It may seem like a simple tale on the surface, but as we dive deep down into our lives, we discover a saga that is more meaningful and more powerful than any Hollywood blockbuster. A story written by the author of life, proclaimed by the angels of heaven, and sung by the people of God for generations. The one goes along weeping, carrying bags of seed. He will surely come back with shouts of joy, carrying his sheaves. Like the other Psalms we've been looking at, Psalm 126 is a psalm of ascent, sung by the people of God as they make their journey to the temple. Each of these songs is hauntingly beautiful in its own right, filled with more honesty and sincerity than we typically bring to our worship on Sunday mornings. These songs seem to be strange prelude to worship, and yet they help us see our God and ourselves in a new light. In Psalm 126, we discover a song of life lived out for God as a witness to others. Psalm 126 is a song that reveals that our story is not self contained, that we are part of a greater story, that our story is not flat, it has highs and lows, peaks and valleys. Our story is also not for ourselves. It's a story meant to be shared with others. Psalm 126 is a song of witness that bursts out, how great is our God! Sing with me, how great is our God! The song of witness begins, when the Lord restored our fortunes of Zion, we were like those who dream. Our mouths were filled with laughter then, and our tongues with shouts of joy. Before the psalmist explains his own life, he dives into the rich history of his people and discovers that his song is the same song his people have been singing for generations. Restore our fortunes, Lord. When we sing Psalm 126, we discover that our story is not self contained. Our story is part of a larger story. The psalmist is looking back, reflecting, and remembering how God had restored his people over and over again. A quick glance through the Old Testament, and we'll see how they continually turn their back on God. And we discover that over and over again, that God continually restored his people. In fact, God did more than just fulfill his promise. He went above and beyond the call of duty. It was a restoration that they did not deserve. It was like a dream, with their mouths filled with laughter and their tongues with shouts of joy. In the midst of his current story, whatever was befalling him, the psalmist is able to look back and remember how God continually brought restoration to his people. And in this song of witness, we are reminded that our story is not self-contained. My story is part of your story, and your story is part of my story. The story that we sing in the song of witness has been lived out from generation to generation. As we look back, we see God has restored his people over and over again. Where there should be a trail of death and destruction, we discover the hand of the Almighty. And suddenly, with no real work of our own, our mouths are filled with laughter and our tongues with shouts of joy. The author of life has been at work from the beginning, restoring our fortunes, restoring the fortunes of Zion. As Eugene Peterson writes in A Long Obedience in the Same Direction, Psalm 126 encourages us in a way of faith to both experience and share joy. It tells the story of God's acts, which puts laughter into people's mouths and shouts on their tongues. It repeats the promises of God who accompanies his wandering, weeping children until they arrive home, exuberant with armloads of blessings. It announces the existence of a people who assemble to worship God and disperse to live to God's glory. Those whose lives are bordered on one side by a memory of God's acts and the other by hope in God's promises. As you join in singing Psalm 126, a song of witness, remember your story is not self-contained. Your story and my story are part of his story. His story is a story worth reading. His story is a story worth hearing. His story is a story worth telling. As we join in singing the song of witness, we discover that our story is not flat. Those who sow in tears will reap with shouts of joy. Each of us has a story with its highs and lows, peaks and valleys, sowing and reaping, sorrow and joy, tears and shouts. None of us have the calm and comfortable life that we all seem to want. All the stories, all our stories, come with troubles and trials, as well as hopes and happiness. Psalm 126 is a witness to our past, our present, and our future. It is sung to remind us that the Maker of heaven and earth is with us in our past and will restore us in our future, while offering strength we need to make it through the present. In our clip from The Lord of the Rings, we find Sam and Frodo at a time of desperation. They look around at all the destruction and pain and wonder how will they ever be able to do the task before them. Sam remembers the songs and stories of the past, of great heroes who have gone before them, men and women that have fought against them or fought against all odds because they knew in their hearts that there was good in the world. Then he wondered, will someone someday tell the story of Frodo and the ring? This future hope is what keeps Sam going. And for Frodo, it's knowing that he has a friend who stuck by him through it all. As they reflect on the past and look towards the future, Sam and Frodo are able to take the steps needed to move their story along, to complete their quest to throw the Ring of Power into the fiery pits of Mordor from whence it came. What we saw lived out with these two hobbits are the same things we see when we sing Psalm 126, that God has moved in the past and restored the fortunes of Zion, bringing laughter and shouts of joy. And we hope and trust that he is at work, that one day in the future he will once again restore our fortunes, and all that pain and trouble will be worth it. Though one goes along weeping, carrying bags of seed, he will surely come back with shouts of joy, carrying his sheaves. Now, I'm not a farmer, And I don't know much about that, but I love this imagery, how God will use his seed, his seed of his word and our tears to bring new life in the world. And I know we've all seen that in our lives. And as Peterson writes, the hard work of sowing seed is what looks perfectly empty. Oh, in what looks like perfectly empty earth has a time of harvest. All suffering, all pain, all emptiness, all disappointment is seed. Sow it in God, and He will finally bring a crop of joy from it. We might find ourselves in the present singing, "Restore our fortunes, Lord." Our presents feel like drought-stricken land, dried out and brittle. We are praying for rain. The streams of abundance will flow and fill our souls. We have seen his work in the past. We trust his promise in the future. But what about our present? What about now, when my husband is sick, when my child has turned his back on you, when my social security is drying up, when my anger is bubbling over, when my hurt is cutting deep? It's those moments that we need to sing Psalm 126 the most. We need a reminder that our stories are not flat, and they never will be. As Peterson writes, it's clear in Psalm 126 that the one who wrote it and those who sang it were no strangers to the dark side of things. They carried the painful memories of exile in their bones and the scars of oppression on their backs. They knew the deserts of the heart and the nights of weeping. They knew what it meant to sow in tears. God is a part of our story as much as we are a part of his story. Singing Psalm 126 allows us to continue on in the present, trusting that the tears we cry are watering the crops of tomorrow. And in our feeble minds, it might seem silly. Why can't God just let us live these flat lives, avoiding the tears and sorrows? How does it benefit us in any way? Why doesn't God just let us live happy, content, self-satisfied lives? But that's when we realize that's not the central message of 126. Psalm 126 is a song of witness. It says that they said among the nations, the Lord has done great things for them. As a nation, the people of Israel were set apart by God, not because they were special, but so that they could be a light to the nations. God did not restore their fortunes so that they could revel in their wealth, but so that they could bless others. Psalm 126 is not a song for us to survive our present pain. It's a song to be sung for the nations, a story not for ourselves. Our lives are to be lived on the fields of the nations, sowing the seeds of God's love in our world, watering them with our tears, so that God will produce a harvest among the nations. In Matthew 9, we're told that Jesus continued going around to all the towns and villages, teaching in the synagogues, preaching the good news of the kingdom, and healing every disease and every sickness. He was restoring the fortunes of Zion. And when he saw the crowds, he felt compassion for them because they were distressed and dejected, like a sheep without a shepherd. Then he said to his disciples, the harvest is abundant, but the workers are few. Therefore, pray to the Lord of the harvest to send out workers into his harvest. We are called to share our story, his story in our lives, to the nations. The harvest is plentiful. Go along weeping, carrying bag of seed. Take the seed of the good news of Jesus into the world. Share how God has been working in your lives, in the past, in the present, and toward the future. And all the tears that we shed will one day turn into a mighty harvest. We will come back with shouts of joy, carrying his sheaves. Psalm 126 is a song of witness, a song of his story being displayed for our lives so that we can sing a song for the nations. May we be a shining light to the nations, a shining light to the people of the earth, till the whole world sees the glory of your name. May your pure light shine through us. Allow your story to be his story, the story of God's good news, the good news that God so loved the world that he sent his Son, the good news that while we are still sinners, Christ died for us, the good news that everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved, the good news that those who sow in tears will reap with shouts of joy. When the Lord restored the fortunes of Zion, we were like those who dream. Our mouths were filled with laughter then, and our tongues with shouts of joy. Then they said among the nations, the Lord has done great things for them. The Lord has done great things for us. We were joyful. Restore our fortunes, Lord, like the watercourses of the Negev. Those who sow in tears will reap with shouts of joy. Though one goes along weeping, carrying the bag of seed, he will surely come back with shouts of joy, carrying his sheaves. Amen.